Well, without further ado, I hope that was a useful overview. I'll pass over, if I may, to Georgie, who's going to tell us about how you implement sustainability through embedding it in curricula. And Georgie is Associate Professor in Education for Sustainable Development at the University of West of England in Bristol. Thank you, Georgie, over to you.
Thanks very much, Liz. I'll just aim to get the slides. Yeah, there we go. Hopefully that's what you can see. Yes, thank you all for allowing me an extra 4 minutes, because I've got a lot to introduce to you here, and what I will do is sort of run through what's here, but use the question time to then elaborate a bit further on anything which has captured people's interests particularly. And the first thing I really want to do is also to acknowledge Dr. Sam Bonnet, who is one of our senior lecturers in environmental science. He is the departmental rep for our internal knowledge exchange for sustainability education. And so, as you will see, some of the examples that have come from our environmental science undergraduate program particularly have come from Sam. My role as Associate Professor in Education for Sustainable Development is to take an institutional lead on our ESD activities, and I'll present to you one particular area of work that we've been using to frame this activity for the last few years, which is our Sdg mapping. I'm not going to dwell too much on it because some of you will have seen it before. So again, just by way of context, I'm not going to repeat what Sian and Liz have already said about the context for this, but really I want to just focus on giving you some examples of how we have used these ideas to inform our enhancement and development of our environmental science program over the last few years. So this is sort of a bit of history predating the new benchmark statement, but as we've taken an institutional approach to using both ESD and the SDGs, some of those ideas have been infusing our program for some time. So that's what I will briefly do. I can see chat messages. Rebecca, will you let me know if there's anything that I need to respond to urgently, because I can't sort of see what those are?
Yeah, I will do.
Thank you very much. Okay, so yeah, the context for the benchmark statement is here just to inform people who are looking at this presentation back in isolation, but I don't need to repeat it for this audience. Similarly, in terms of the key headlines from the Esd Guidance, just some things that I've picked out relevant to our work. We are fortunate at UE to have strong strategic commitment for ESD, but I would say that you know, if you're in an institution where that's not the case, don't be too disheartened. There's plenty you can still do on the ground, and perhaps influence that strategic commitment over time. It mentions Sdg framing of the curriculum, and that's absolutely something what we've been working on doing for a number of years now, and also moving towards a position where this is much more embedded in the program and not a bolt-on. But one thing I would say, while I think of it now, is that sometimes having a bolt-on approach can be an important first step to getting towards more embedded approach and holistic approach. So I wouldn't dismiss those types of approaches. It's particularly in the short term, if you have staff shortages and can't deliver something more embedded, or don't have the support across a program or department to get to that holistic embeddedness straight away. Okay, so a bit more of the context which Liz has really already introduced to you. Just to say something for literally a minute or two about our Sdg mapping activity. This is something we've been working on for 6 years now. Our ambition is to map almost everything the university does, but our focus mainly to date has been on undergraduate programs. So looking across programs to see how students are given the opportunity to learn about sustainable development. And again, I would emphasize that really, despite having been working on this for 6 years or so, it's still largely been about content. It's only been in the last year or so that we've started to move more systematically towards thinking about the delivery of that content, the assessment, as I sort of alluded to before, and the bit we're still really just on the threshold of embarking on is consideration of the wider learning environment and community. So lots more to do on this, but as I said, we started in 2016 with about 10 or 12 maps, and environmental science was actually one of those original programs that we mapped. And those early processes were really important to help us to understand what this task should look like. And I think the position we've got to is recognizing that what it should look like should be determined by the program team that are undertaking it. So we have consciously not been entirely prescriptive as to how a program should go about this, apart from the fact that it should be as consultative as possible. It should ideally be led by the program leader, but involve the entire program team. And in fact, last week I was at an away day of our social work program who were doing just that. Where we're at currently is that we've got 80 plus maps. If I introduce some of those to you, our BSc sociology program examples. I've just given you some different versions of what this looks like in case any of these are useful for you. So this particular map, this is an extract from it, looks at the issues that are covered in the program relevant to each SDG, and also lists modules from the program where that content is delivered. So that's one approach, and some other examples from relating to other goals in that. So quite nice summary. And you can also see there in terms of partnership that some of this is about process of student learning in terms of their volunteering and placement activity. Creative and professional writing have done something different. You can't, the text is not particularly legible on that first version, but what they've done here is to identify particular modules and then state what the relevance of that module is to each particular goal and the issues that it represents. One thing I would say, obviously here, these module codes, I'm sure each of your institutions have got something similar, and you'll be looking at those thinking, yep, they're as undecipherable as the ones that we use. So there's something about presentation of this, but the content is still interesting. This is a very, very different interpretation of the task. They were looking at what percentage of their modules cover each issue. And again, what I particularly like about this is that this represented a team sitting down and thinking, how could we do this? What are the various ways in which we might look at our program and our module offering in terms of these issues? They've since sort of rejected this particular interpretation because one, it doesn't make sense to me to try to aim for 100% of all modules covering all 17 SDGs. I think that would be a highly inappropriate expectation to set. So that's one of a couple of reasons why this isn't going to be an approach that they take forward, but still it shows good engagement with the task. Data science, they've taken it's a much more general, this is again a first pass at the task here, simply identifying that coursework. This is an example of a program that doesn't have much explicit content in terms of its coverage of SDGs, and so what they've sort of framing it is that within many assignment briefs, students have the opportunity to select data that they might work with, and that they are encouraged to use data linked to sustainable development issues. But again, clearly this is an entry-level example, I think, of how students might be given the chance to engage with these issues. This is a module level approach. Again, I would never advocate for any given module, particularly to cover all 17 SDGs, unless it was called environmental science for the SDGs, which funnily enough, we do have a module a bit like that. So in that case, it would be appropriate to look at this. If that was the ambition and the outcome, the core outcome of the module, then it might be appropriate to take a module level mapping approach. And again, just a different example from our business and management, where you can just see a huge sort of discrepancy, I suppose, in the amount of coverage of particular goals, which in itself is a useful thing to reflect upon. Is that okay? Should this program team be looking to enhance their coverage of issues like, for example, clean water and sanitation and affordable and clean energy, or can they justifiably explain why there is very little coverage of those issues? And this is a sort of heat map approach taken by our BSc geography team. So this was each module down at the left-hand column there. You've got year 1, year 2, and year 3 just demarcated by a slightly thicker line across the row. And then for each module, sort of coverage of the issues from each goal in that particular module. The program team might use this again to reflect on the coverage of each SDG. Are they particularly light on in coverage of certain issues? Is that a problem? If it's a problem, how are they going to fix it? Where are those issues going to be covered in relevant modules? Okay. And finally, other example, civil and environmental engineering, taking an approach of a sort of statement of the links between the discipline of civil engineering and the challenges represented in each of the SDGs. So through teaching, we emphasize the ability, missing there, for the next generation of civil engineers to be critical to the development of sustainable and affordable cities through design of transport system structures and public places. So it's much more of a sort of ambition and, as I say, discipline level mapping rather than the detail of module by module coverage. And so to our environmental science program. So I was invited to present to this forum 3 years ago, and this was the map that I presented. This was our original environmental science mapping. And what they had chosen to map originally was ways by which the study discipline of environmental science might help to inform solutions to the problems represented in the SDGs. So again, I know the text is quite small here, so I can explain what is represented. So there are 2 bits of text in each box. One is the solutions. So for poverty there, they talk about sustainable development being linked to environmental issues, and therefore studying environmental science and understanding those issues can help to resolve poverty. And they have identified 2 modules, one at level 1, law, economics and management, and one at level 3, advanced quantity survey. That's not the right content for that. There's an issue with that. So that's one of the approaches that they took back then. And what's happened since, this is one of the few disciplines where they have gone back, partly because there have been changes to the module, and also the broader sector expectations continue to change. So they have gone back and remapped their program. They also use the SDGs as a tool to inform module and program enhancement over that period of time. So as they update modules, with this programmatic overview in mind, they can consider which types of issues, which types of approaches to teaching and learning might need to be enhanced, so that their ambition is now more about enabling students to progress their level of knowledge and understanding and engagement with these issues across the 3 levels of the undergraduate program, which is, I'm sure we can all recognize is a more advanced position to be in, rather than simply trying to find a place where students can learn about what the issues are across their 3 years. Obviously, with environmental science, you have a discipline that already covers so much of this already that it's not that difficult to then move on to that higher level or higher order skills framing. So one of the things that opportunities that have arisen through this kind of long-term approach to using the SDGs for curriculum enhancement is to enable a more critical evaluation of the links between the SDGs and the environmental science program. In comparison to other subject areas, obviously there is an explicit link, but one of the things that our program team have dedicated themselves to, which is now an expectation in the subject benchmark statement, is to make sure that there is a broad understanding of sustainability presented, both in terms of interdisciplinarity and also in terms of global perspective. Okay, so this is the new environmental science mapping, and they've done a slightly different thing with this one, which is to talk more about the issues that are covered, taken from the targets that sit beneath the Sustainable Development Goals, and then to identify where in each level of study, which modules deliver that content. Obviously, there's quite a lot to say in terms of the environmental specific SDGs, so climate action, life below water, life on land. So they've identified issues that the students learn about, and they've listed the modules there. And one of the things that I think is great about this is that there are modules at level 1, level 2, and level 3, which cover these issues, which enables that progress from what is this all about to, oh, now I understand it, and then in level 3, and now I can apply it. Even looking at the other goals, though, this program now demonstrates high levels of engagement across almost all of the 17 SDGs. And one thing that the eagle-eyed amongst you might spot is that there is some repetition in the particular modules that are identified. So this level 1 module, Environment Society, is the vehicle by which most of these issues are introduced in the first year. As we go through level 2 and level 3, again, there are some modules that keep popping up, environmental impacts and mitigation being one of them. At level 3, we have a resource security and sustainability module, but there are various other level 3 modules that enable students to specialize in certain areas, as you will have in most institutions. Okay, so I won't...
Got over a couple of minutes left.
No problem, thanks very much. Yeah, so these slides will be shared, so you can come back and look at the detail of these if you want to. But as I say, one of the things I think is fantastic is that there is good coverage across all of the goals. A final couple of things to say about the translation of the ideas from the Esd Guidance and now in the benchmark statement. From our programmatic learning outcomes point of view, again, I'm not claiming this to be unique in the sector by any means, but we have program learning outcomes based on knowledge and understanding and intellectual skills, which is that ways of thinking that Liz referenced. Then the practical skills, which are the ways of practicing, and the sort of transferable skills and other attributes. And one of the things I want us to be doing at institutional level is looking at how we can further represent some of those ESD competencies in these program learning outcomes. My dog agrees with me that that's important. Also to say that we have, sorry about that. Wouldn't be a conference presentation from home if you didn't have the dog barking. So level 1, we have a compulsory module, as I said, which covers many of these issues, including the economic perspective. I won't go into the detail of the module learning outcomes, but there might be something useful here for other people to translate into their programs potentially. And similarly, in terms of our level 3 compulsory module, you can see a lot more criticality, whereas the level 1 outcomes are more about understanding and awareness. These are about the critical capabilities of students. And in terms of assessment, we do still have some exams in this program. So I'm sure that will be an area that the program team look to change over the next iterations of the program. We have Sam, and again, just something I wanted to note about staffing is that, Sam teaches across the 3 levels of the program, and he sees that as being hugely beneficial because he can track that progress and be responsible for it. It can be high risk if that's all that you have, but we do have, as you will all have, teams that are very competent in delivering across all of these issues. So the final comments, just final 2 slides. couple of things that Sam's working on is he wanted to highlight the potentials, the sort of opportunities for research that engagement with the SDGs has brought, particularly around rewilding. Lots of external bodies are engaging with the SDGs, so it's useful from that point of view. And he's also keen to look at more interdisciplinarity, as in bringing external experts into the program team, just from a sort of delivery point of view. He's very keen to look at potentially mapping carbon footprints of students on a module, which I think, again, from my point of view, these are the kinds of really exciting, innovative ideas that come from engaging with the SDGs. So I'm excited to see where he goes with that. Hopefully it'll be something replicable. And from my perspective, lots more activities relating to mapping. I'm doing quite a lot of work around competence development at the moment, thinking about how we develop and, importantly, assess competencies of students through our assessment activities. Okay, that's it. I'm probably just over time. Apologies for that, and apologies for the dog. I will stop sharing and see if anyone has any queries about any of that.
Many thanks, Georgie, and no problems about the dog. My dogs are going to join in with yours because somebody's just come to the door. So don't worry, we can have a dog fest. So we've got a couple of questions, thank you. So we've got, firstly, at an institutional level, would you advise, or even at a program level, would you advise initially looking at content and links to the SDGs, or would you start the process in a different way?
I think content is a good place to start because people can readily relate to it, and anything that it helps people to look at the SDGs and raise their understanding of what they are about, the ambition. It really is about interconnectedness between the issues, and so I think this whole set approach is absolutely critical. I would advocate extremely strongly against anybody trying to claim that a particular program, I think it'd be easy for environmental science programs to say, well, we're all about delivering SDGs 13, 14 and 15, and that is not what the underlying principles are about. So I think starting with content and starting with the whole set of SDGs is a logical place to start.
Thank you. And we've had a couple of really positive comments. First of all, thank you, hugely informative. And then thanks for sharing those examples, Georgina. I've recently started the process of mapping SDGs across my modules to be extended to our program. So it's really useful to see those different approaches. And I think the flexibility of your approach, you've got a really clear framework, but there's flexibility is a real strength.
And I would say that approach, was that Amanda, that if it's not been done at program level, if you've got someone with a bit of a passion, I won't say time because I know none of you have got time, but if you've got the sort of passion and intention to do a little bit of something to demonstrate what it might look like, that has been, again, a very important factor in our success in being able to roll this out so comprehensively. I'm forever grateful for the people that helped me to go first, who went first in those early years, because I'm presenting to your program team, look, here's what I've done some thinking about my modules. Could we all collectively look at this? I think is really a good idea.
Thanks, Georgie. And we've got a final question from Phil. Where SDGs are used in this way, is there a place or even a need to include critique of the SDGs within the curriculum?
Yes, it's a short answer to that. Yes, this is not, this could be absolutely about critiquing the SDGs as a framework, and I'm very conscious of the fact that they're not everybody's favorite framework. So, particularly at the high, I think you've got to understand something to be able to critique it. So I think there is a need to have that awareness raising stage for students. As a program team, yes, we've yet to have a program team sit down and take this task on and come back and say we reject the SDGs as a framework, but we wouldn't be against that, because it's always been an ambition to have them think critically about this task, and if that means rejecting them, so be it. I can see Jim's here. We haven't. I don't think we would reject an approach like that, Jim. But yes, in a higher education setting, critique is absolutely appropriate.
Yeah, so just for those of you who can't see the chat, Jim suggested that mapping should also address the negative impacts of the discipline on the SDGs as well as the positive coverage. I was just wondering how you, to what extent you've been able to get teams to think about the interconnectedness of the SDGs as well in that part of that process, because it was clear with some of the units they clearly are interconnected, but to what extent teams make the interconnectedness explicit in their mapping?
In the mapping, it's not probably very obvious in any of the versions that we've created, and it's where, although there are problems with having one more, if you had a program where every single SDG was only covered by one module, I think that would be a problem. On the plus side, having all of those issues covered in one place does enable that holistic assessment to take place. But I wouldn't say we've any of the sort of finished maps that we've got. I think that the other thing to say about this, though, these maps are sort of one output, and there's an awful lot of other stuff that's been produced that sits with program teams, the kind of messy back notes on bits of paper that inform this. And as I said, the social work team the week before last were very much thinking about those interconnectedness from a practice of social work perspective, and I'm hoping that their map might represent those and be a new interpretation. Internal competition is a great thing because they're a very competitive lot, and I've said, well, you could be the first team at UE to do this, so they're very driven by that.
Fantastic, thank you, Georgie.